Excellent. High school educator, special education teacher, student support services. Very cool. Advisors, foundations. I love this. This is so fun.
Yeah, this is great.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 11:31, so hopefully everyone's getting logged in and joining the session smoothly as possible. Good morning, everyone. My name is J.R. Leistra. I'm the Assistant Director of the West Virginia Gear Up program here at the Higher Education Policy Commission. Work in the Division of Student Affairs. Before we get started, just want to give you a heads up. As you've likely already seen, you can post your questions or thoughts, comments into the chat box. Be aware that there are two separate chats on your top right. One is for the event overall, and there's also the tab for the session, which is just this session. So I would recommend clicking the session tab, going ahead and listing anything in the chat box as you'd like to add. Or you can type a question into the Q&A. You have the option of posting that in there anonymously if you'd like to. Our two speakers join us today. I'm very excited to have each of them for this session, which is titled Student Ready Strategies, a Student Ready Framework to Advance Student Success. It is Vanessa Cadle, who is a Senior Vice President at Student Ready Strategies. Vanessa is a former colleague, coworker of mine, so we're very excited to see Vanessa join us today. And then her colleague at Student Ready Strategies is Theo Meek. He is the Director of Strategic Implementation. So they have much more impressive bios. I'm not going to go into all that because I want to use our time as wisely as possible. If they would like to share some additional remarks as to what they've been doing, I know they share, decades of basically experience in working with students throughout this process and throughout Student Ready and Student Success Solutions. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Vanessa.
All right. Thank you so much, JR. It is so great to be here with everybody today. I want to just reiterate what JR said. We're going to use the chat box a lot during our session. I think all of us, after being, 18 months now into the pandemic, we are ready to be talking with each other and really engaging instead of just watching virtually. So we're going to ask you to kind of talk and engage with us in the chat box. So I see a lot of you using that, and maybe before some of you popped on, I asked everybody just to introduce themselves so we could see who we have. I'm excited because we have folks from higher education, we have folks in K-12, we have folks in philanthropy that have joined us for this session, and that's awesome. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Student Ready Strategies here in a minute, and all the people we work for are all represented here. Education Alliance, I used to do a lot of work with you when I worked at HEPC, so this is exciting. Anyway, so I want to acknowledge, though, that this presentation is definitely geared more toward higher education, but it is applicable to all of you. So please don't leave. You are going to get something from this, I promise. And let's see. So Theo, go ahead and you can advance the slide. So who are we? Who or what is Student Ready Strategies? We are a higher education consulting organization that is only at this point 2 years young, but our team, as JR mentioned earlier, has a ton of experience in the classroom as faculty members, as student affairs professionals. We've worked at the state and the system level and at national nonprofits focused on higher education. Our founder, her name is Sarah Ansell. She couldn't be with us today. She's really upset about that. We love working with West Virginia, but she's on vacation. She took her kids to DC, but so she won't be here today. But she is the one who really set out to create a consulting organization that you're probably all really familiar with. This might not just stop in, give you some advice, and then leave. We are really focused on being a partner and helping you create change. We stay with the organizations who we're working with to evolve every step of the process that you're working on. And we found that our partners really like this approach, and we really enjoy being an active member of the team as transformation happens at the organizations and institutions that we work with. And you can see our vision and mission here. This is what we do. This is why we were founded. We truly do believe that every single student can succeed. And it is our job to evolve our systems and our structures to ensure they do. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And the key word in our vision and mission is all, every student. we focus heavily on helping institutions reach equitable outcomes for their students. So we're well versed in strategies that support students historically marginalized racially, those who are economically disadvantaged, and those who are not the traditional college age students. So, a lot of our community college students, those are above 24 years of age. And so when you hear us talk about student success, what we mean is equity. So we want to, make sure that you all understand that we're really talking about equitable outcomes here. So what I mentioned earlier, we're excited to see all these different folks in the room because we do our work across all of these entities, right? We work with higher education institutions, of course, both 2-year and 4-year, but we also work with system offices. We're very, very good partners with the AGPC and CTCS. We're working on the OER work. So some of you might be working on the Open Educational Resources Grant and the Community of Practice. Theo and I help with that. So if you're here and you're a part of that, it's great to see you. We work with nonprofit, student success organization, collaboratives, foundations, philanthropies, and working across this diverse group of educational stakeholders has really given us a unique perspective on the work and helping us deepen all of what we do and what you're going to hear us talk about in the presentation. So yeah, you probably should know who we are. I know we mentioned a little bit about who we are. So as I said, my name is Vanessa Cadle, and I serve as Senior Vice President at SRS. I went to college and grad school in West Virginia to Bethany College and WVU. I spent half of my career there at Marshall and with the AGPC, and I'm actually finishing up my doctorate at Marshall right now. Pray for me. Hopefully that's done by the end of the year. I live in Indiana now, but West Virginia is incredibly special to me. I always try to attend this conference. I've been doing it for the last, 5 or so years, 6 years. So again, excited to be here. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Meek to introduce himself.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Theo Meek. As Vanessa said, I am the Director of Strategic Implementation. I am a West Coast kid. I am located in Nevada, but spent a lot of time working in Nevada's 4-year colleges and system office, working towards a lot of the components of building a student-ready institution and a student-ready system. So very excited to join you all. And I am headed to West Virginia for my first trip down there soon. So if there's somewhere I need to visit, send me a private message.
Yeah, there's lots of places that we can talk about, Theo. All right, so I have to add this today, y'all. Today is a super special day for me. Today is my 9th wedding anniversary, so I wanted to share 2 photos from that day. The West Virginia University women's soccer team was practicing on this very, very hot, humid July day in 2012, and Coach Izzo Brown gave them a break so we could come down to the field and take photos. So we had a reception at the Alumni Center, and the whole day was a dream, and it's just a very exciting day in my life, and I wanted to share my West Virginia connection to that with you all and some of my Morgantown memories. So that's just very brief. We're going to go back to the real stuff now. All right, so maybe you're thinking, you came into the session and you're like, what does that even mean? What the heck does that even mean? Or maybe you're like, I've read books on this and I know all about what student ready is. I'm going to give you a break from our voices for 1 second. We're going to turn to the chat box because I want you all to kind of reflect and share your definition, your thinking, your initial reactions around what a student ready organization or institution looks like. If you have any, and JR said this earlier, but you need to go onto the right side of your screen, click on the session tab, and then the chat little function there, and that'll pull that up. So don't be shy. I know this is the first time we're asking you to share. There are no wrong answers, of course, but what does student ready mean to you? Flexible and adaptable to the individual student needs. That's great. Challenging content, dedicated resources for student interaction. I like that, Louise. Other things, student ready. Confidence. Engage students with opportunities for real life application. Oh, here they come. Now they're coming in hot. Being able to help full range of students succeed. Yes, Peter. To have ourselves ready to pivot to the needs, which are always happening. Yes. Having a plethora of resources available, but adapting, easy to navigate processes, ready to engage students where they are. Communication to all students. Love it. Holistic approach. Understand the educational needs of all students. Accessible. Awesome. You all, these are amazing responses. And I agree with so much of that. Theo, if you want to click to the next slide, you can keep putting your ideas in there. Yes. Thanks, Theo. So for us, this is something that we think about all the time. This is flipping our mindset from thinking about making students college ready to creating institutions and organizations that are student ready. Institutions that have systems, structures, policies, processes, traditions, communications, like someone else mentioned, that support every student, not just those that higher education was traditionally designed to support, right? We know historically, those who have taken history of higher ed courses know that higher education was designed really to keep white men enrolled, and usually affluent white men enrolled in higher education. And so that's why it's really important for us to think about how we change the system. And as I said, we know that every student can succeed. It's just going to take a lot of work on all of our part to make that happen, to really evolve our systems. And this is a quote that really guides our thinking every day at SRS. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. I want you guys to really think about this. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. So would you take your dog to play at the park that doesn't have a fence? Probably not, right? I would be very sad. My dogs would definitely run away. Heather, I know you wouldn't either. That would result in a lost doggo, frantic you. We wouldn't do that, right? The parks with a fence are designed to keep your dogs safe and keep them having fun. How long do we all spend every day scrolling through social media accounts, right? Looking at Facebook, looking at Instagram. Do you buy things from the ads that you see? I know I do. I'm a sucker for a good Instagram ad. The systems that you're seeing there are designed to get you to spend time on the platform and then spend money on the advertisers, right? So their systems are perfectly designed to get the results that they do. So I want you to think about higher education, K-12, foundations, whatever system, whatever organization you currently work within, right? Think about this question for a minute. Theo, go ahead and click.
All right, sorry, I was frozen.
That's all right. What is the system at your institution, school, foundation, whatever it is, perfectly designed to do? Really reflect. At this minute, what results do you get? Type those in the chat box for us. They can be positive, they can be negative, they can be neutral, whatever comes to mind for you. No judgment at all. What is your system perfectly designed to do? Admit students. Other things. What other ideas do y'all have? Give scholarship money. Yep. Institutions definitely can do that. The HUPC can definitely do that. Foundations can definitely do that. What other things? Build school business partnerships for students. That's cool, Sally. Educate students and their families about the benefits of a higher education. I don't think anything is perfect. I agree with that, Reagan. Deliver a strong curriculum. Attract students from limited areas, certifying veterans and creating a veteran-friendly environment. That's awesome. Great, Sarah. Prepare students for a college or a job. Get students ready to be successful in higher education. That's great. All right, those are really, really good. Okay, so we're gonna take a step much higher right now. I'm going to run through 3 quick data slides because I know data slides are always not our favorite. But I want to remind you of some data that a lot of you are probably familiar with, particularly if you're working in the higher ed space. The HEPC and CTCS do such a good job of sharing this information. So if you want to go check this out later, you certainly can. It's on their data shop's website. I want to note that at SRS, we really believe in tracking on-time graduation rates. So I applaud the commission and the council for providing transparent numbers around on-time graduation. So for those maybe outside of higher ed, a lot of times what happens in higher education is that we track 150% or 200% of your program time, which means that we're looking at students graduating in 2-3 years at a 2-year institution, or even 6 years, sometimes looking that far out. So we, again, believe in this 100% graduation, which means 2-year students graduate in 2 years. And so this is what you're looking at here. You can see on the slide that the on-time graduation rate for the community colleges in West Virginia is around 12%. It's been on a steady incline, you had a little dip there, but only about 11% of students who begin a 2-year degree graduate in 2 years. Now, let me be very, very clear. This is not unique to West Virginia. This is a number that is very common across the country. We see this in states all over the nation. This is what the on-time graduation rate looks like, which is a lot of times why people don't measure it or talk about it very often. And the same goes for these percentages on the 4-year graduation rate. So you see they're overall climbing, but they're sitting around 35%. So if we take these out to 150% graduation rates, the number bumps up about 10 percentage points for the 2 years, 20 percentage points on the 4-year side. But we know that adding time adds a lot of financial burden to our students and lost opportunity costs and a lot of things like that. So we like to see what these results are. So if we're thinking about the system of higher education, these are some of the results that we're seeing. So here are 2 more little slides that I want to go over. If you click one more time, Theo. So here, go back one. Thank you. Gave away my secret. So first, here is the fall-to-fall retention rate for all West Virginia students. So in higher ed, it's extremely important to look at your retention rate. As you know, many institutions, not just in West Virginia, but across the country, are losing population. The traditional age college student population is declining. And so retention becomes exceedingly important. All of those that are on this session from admissions, you all know this, right? So retention is really, really important. And the students we do enroll, we need to keep. So we're looking at around a 74% fall-to-fall retention rate at any institution, and 70% are staying at the institution at which they started. And so what I want to show you here is something we're going to talk about throughout the presentation, which is disaggregating data. This next slide that Theo is going to show is going to show you the comparison between all West Virginia students and then those who receive a Pell Grant. So we know that is the proxy by which the federal government measures economic need. And so our students in West Virginia who are Pell recipients are being retained at around a 66%. That dips from that 74 to 66. And then again, if it's starting at the same institution, you're looking around a 62% rate. These are some real results from West Virginia. So I want to think about these from our conversation. And again, these aren't different from what we see across the country, but this is just something I want you to keep in mind when we think about what our systems are designed to do. So after seeing just a few of those metrics, feel free to type into the chat box, what kind of results is this entire system perfectly designed to get? And I want to point something else out. I know that there's a lot of Gear Up folks in here. I recognize some names, and so I'm excited to see the Gear Up folks in here. One thing that I think is really cool about the rest of the presentation, you can really think about this when you're talking to students about what institutions they should be attending, those who are student ready. And so I'm just going to put that in your mind as we move forward. Okay, so now that I've got you thinking about systems and student success, I'm going to hand it over to Theo, and he's going to talk about the Student Ready Framework. And this is a way in which institutions can approach transforming their structure to be laser focused on equitable student success and your organizations and your K-12 systems. So go ahead, Theo.
Wonderful. Thanks, Vanessa. So, Vanessa talked about the importance of perfectly designed systems, and many of you identified what your system is perfectly designed to do, be it admit students, hand out scholarship money, build relationships, whatever it may be. I'm going to share the framework when we think about changing structures to better outcomes, to better the outcomes for students. So this student ready framework is a three-layered continuum, and I use the word continuum very consciously because it is not linear, and you all as institutional leaders do not progress through this framework as a staged approach. You may begin at the structural change piece while making small modifications to culture, things like that. We do believe, however, that these of course they interplay, but they are stacked in a way that culture really sets the foundation for promoting good, positive, effective structural change and continuous improvement. So now I'm going to share a little bit more about these three factors of the Student Ready framework and walk you through a contextualized example of how we utilize this model. Culture, again, like I said, we believe is the foundation to both effective and longstanding structural change and continuous improvement. Culture is the lifeblood of your high school, your campus, your organization. It is both physical and non-physical. Campus culture might be the homecoming game that's widely attended by the entire town every October. Culture might also be your institutional leadership reevaluating your strategic plan every 5 years. But culture can also be non-physical. It can be a culture of acceptance that rural students just don't have access to broadband internet, despite your institution or high school encouraging blended learning environments and putting a lot of information online. It may also be requiring students to purchase thousands of dollars in textbooks every year, despite knowing that 70% of our student population is receiving the Pell Grant, what we know is an indicator of financial need for students. We believe that culture exists in documents and definitions, whether material or non-material, in that these documents should and are living, breathing documents. Strategic plans, marketing communications plans, professional evaluations, student course evaluations, these are all documents that need to be monitored, they need to be nurtured, and they need to be fine-tuned as the needs of your students evolve. We also believe that culture is a set of signals and symbolisms that you communicate outwards. Having only teaching faculty at a student success meeting does not foster the same results as including a diverse community in your processes. So some bullets there on what a diverse stakeholdership might look like involving students, and that's outside of the limited minority of students that participate in student government associations. So reaching out beyond your student government associations, and that's true amongst high school and the higher education environment, going out to those clubs that clubs or groups of students that are not traditionally involved in some of the more legislative processes at your organization, involving community members that have an interesting stakeholdership in your institution, instead of relying on your city council members or your mayor to serve that role. And perhaps most importantly for me, it's involving the frontline staff. We heard here that we have some academic advisors, some student services professionals. Involving them is mission critical, and Vanessa and I could not tell you how many times we coach institutions through decisions that involve those who are most affected, be it students, advisors, counselors, other student support staff, and they're not at the table at the conversations. And that is a massive missed opportunity to build an inclusive culture. Finally, we believe that equity is why and how you should build or fine-tune your culture, not an added benefit of a positive culture. Equity has to be embedded into your culture, top down, top to bottom, side to side, left to right, north to south, whatever you want to call it. It has to be the reason why you're doing this work, not a policy afterthought, not a benefit to structural reform. It's your institutional why you're engaging in this work from the beginning. And it should be why you've embarked in this kind of system or this experience in reforming systems. So now we'll talk a little bit about the second component of the framework, which is structural change. To change systems and structures, we have to know the history of where we've been and why we've been there. For us, we rely on finely disaggregated data over the years to understand how and why we've arrived at this very point. As Vanessa said, understanding how and why we've arrived at this system that's perfectly designed for the outputs that it does. We utilize disaggregated data to pinpoint that fact and pinpoint those barriers. We believe very strongly that examining your own data, owning the wins and owning the opportunities for improvement to pinpoint barriers is how student success begins and how you begin to change structures. Next, we must determine the policies, the processes, the traditions that uphold these barriers that you've identified through your data disaggregation, from academic and financial aid policies to registration and placement processes. Think through what are the physical and non-physical factors that work against student success. We know they exist. It's important to acknowledge that they exist because that's the behavior that we're trying to address in systems change. For us, we like to use focus groups, surveys, interviews from the diverse populations that we've talked about, diverse stakeholderships to identify and determine that information. We also believe that systems change requires systems, not individuals. Unfortunately, systems don't change through the leadership of a single one. I think if they did, Vanessa and I would be out of work because there are very many good people out there doing amazing work on behalf of students. But that doesn't necessarily mean that systems are changing. So approaching it with an institution-wide buy-in for the change is mission critical to changing systems and not just changing, single processes. Let me just stop there and say that it is mission critical to change those processes and policies. Systems change has to start somewhere, and it starts with the individual, but it finishes, motivates, and continues through institutional buy-in. So kind of hitting that part home, systems change cannot be achieved unless institutional buy-in exists among those diverse stakeholders that we talked about. Further, you also need a staunch supporter of the work at the appropriate leadership level to give you all, as the systems change leaders, the cover that you need in your system for those that are less interested in putting student success first and more interested in maintaining the status quo. Having a staunch supporter of your work at the appropriate leadership level provides you that information, provides you that cover, provides you that leadership to move forward with the work, because Vanessa and I are not going to sit here and lead you to believe that every single 100% of your institution will be immediately bought into the idea of systems change. This is exceptionally hard work, and it requires the leadership of many, and you need the right people in the room to give you the right support so that you can carry forth the mission critical work of better serving students. We believe that we accomplish structural change through, again, living, breathing documents, living, breathing action plans, robust action plans that include leads, project leads, deliverables, dates, deadlines, and identified, defined accountability metrics. All will help maintain momentum when you're in the thick of systems change and life and distractions get in the way of your systems change. So I've talked a lot about kind of the idea of structural change and the idea of the Student Ready framework. But now I want to kind of bring it down one level and talk about what this actually looks like in practice. So what you see here is an example of structural change in practice. So, Vanessa and I have gone through and we've done the work to identify that we want to increase retention for Pell eligible students at our institution. We're going to call it Student Ready Institution. So at Student Ready Institution, what we need to do first is that data ownership and really understanding our starting point of where we're at. So we examine the causes of low gateway course success rates to identify how to increase retention of Pell eligible students. And we know that because we want to look at that because when we just looked at our finely disaggregated data, we saw that we have an incredibly leaky pipeline. A lot of students after initial enrollment in math or English are dropping out, or they're failing courses and losing financial aid and then unable to continue to afford their higher education experience. So we examine the causes of low gateway course success rates. And again, it may be that rural students lack internet access, and it's a blended instruction mode where a significant portion of the class is online and only a few lectures are in person. Or perhaps it is a time that conflicts with a student's inability to utilize public transport to get to class, or perhaps it's work that gets in the way. And I see Vanessa's putting a definition in there, and thank you, Vanessa. Gateway courses, we define them as the first college level English or math course that a student needs for their academic program. So for those of you that are more familiar, pre-calculus, composition 1, perhaps college algebra, things like that, those are gateway courses. So what we do once we know that information is we identify the placement measures to first semester courses as a barrier to access. So we've talked a little bit about those. I was just giving some examples. With that information, we then identify what other mechanisms and measures might exist that are highly correlated to student success. So in this specific example of increasing retention for Pell eligible students, we know that if we want to increase retention, focusing on the results of what happens after the first semester is far too late. We know that we need to start much earlier on in the student progression pipeline. So we know that starts with placement, getting students in the right courses, getting students in college level courses if we offer developmental education. And so we might look and say, okay, we use SAT and ACT very regularly for placement, but we've not used high school GPA. And we know that we know from research across the nation and from a look in our own data that high school GPA is the most predictive measure of student success. So we might begin to rely a little bit more on high school GPA. And I see, Janie, a question: how do you determine what the reason is that students have not been successful in the gateway courses? This is a fantastic question. Historically, Vanessa and I have coached institutions through this process by a really robust information gathering session. So we're talking with faculty that are teaching those courses. We're talking with students that are going through those experiences. And we're talking with academic advisors. I will say that academic advisors are, if not the single most important linchpin to student success, they are one of the top 3, and they contain a wealth of information about the student experience. So by kind of we'll start with interviewing those 3 different groups, or those conducting focus groups on those kind of 3 specific populations. And from there, it becomes really easy to triangulate what some of the issues are. Faculty will have certain, things that they feel are barriers to student success. Advisors understand from a non-academic perspective what the barriers are to student success. And then the students themselves are identifying, very anecdotally what their experiences are. So that's a great question. Janie, if you want me to follow up, or Vanessa, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to add something that Theo talked earlier about disaggregated data. And so when we look at the qualitative information that he just described in student interviews and looking at focus groups and talking to faculty and all of that, we kind of compare that to what the disaggregated data are telling us. So we look at the placement measures that are currently being used. We look at what grades the students are getting in those courses and what their overall GPA is. And we use all of that information to kind of pinpoint what is the reason that students haven't been successful. And I will be very clear that this is just a caveat, but what we've seen across the institutions that we worked with, it is because they have not gotten access to the gateway course. Access is the number one thing that students need to get to be able to be successful. It sounds really silly, but it is the most highly correlated factor. So go ahead, Theo.
Excellent, perfect. So continuing with our example, we may identify that high school GPA is a significant factor that we're missing out on an opportunity to more accurately predict student placement and who should go into the right class. So we will develop a policy for incorporating multiple measures for placement. We'll go in and say, okay, if a student, nearly every student will have a high school GPA. Even adult learners, we know, we're returning adults, we know that a high school GPA is still the most predictive measure compared against SAT, ACT, AccuPlacer, things like that. So we'll develop a policy that really leads with high school GPA as our leading placement indicator, and may or may not take into account other placement factors like ACT or SAT, things like that. From that point, when we've developed that policy, we'll then move into really implementing the policy, and most importantly, widely communicating your change with a myriad of stakeholders. So academic advisors, admissions professionals, high school counselors, and those alike, including math faculty and English faculty, those that are in the classroom, communicating that policy widely and implementing it so that it is not just happens chance that the student finds that policy, that it is kind of, we're leading with the forefront of what this policy change is and communicating to students how it betters their success. And then last is, as we, in this example, we want to maintain momentum on our policy. So we would establish a feedback mechanism through regular meetings. And, Vanessa and I might decide, especially because we're in the first year of implementing high school GPA, that we want to meet after every semester, collect student surveys, collect faculty surveys, interview some academic advisors, and really get a feel for where we're at with this placement. Make sure that if we're using cutoffs for high school GPA, that we feel that we're at the appropriate cutoff, and things like that. So that is a very narrow example of structural change in practice. And Vanessa and I are happy to talk anyone through a more specific example in your own field if you're interested in kind of hearing what that looks like. But I do want to talk now about continuous improvement. Now that we have a better understanding of what structural change looks like in practice, it is incredibly imperative that we maintain momentum with continuous improvement as our third component of the Student Ready framework. Continuous improvement should be baked into your implementation action plan and should include certain intervals in which your team meets regularly and checks back in and evaluates your work. So Vanessa, in the example that I just gave, Vanessa and I are meeting semesterly. Other reforms might meet less frequently. It might be bi-yearly, but you're using data to drive those decisions. So throughout your continuous improvement process, there should always be a feedback mechanism that includes every voice from your diverse stakeholdership. And this is not the same idea as having one feedback mechanism for every group within your stakeholdership. The way that you all communicate with other professional staff and students the frequency and method of which you communicate that with them looks different among those groups. It also looks very different from the way that you communicate with your community and local businesses and whatnot. So really tailoring your feedback mechanism to meet your diverse populations that are represented where they're at is the most important way to get effective feedback. And then finally, to carry out effective continuous improvement that really benefits that structural change and maintains a strong culture, we must make decisions based on data and research, not feelings and emotional. Intentional data-driven changes and modifications make for stronger systems change. Emotion-driven changes always lead to more turbulent structural change that is not sustained because it's tied to the feelings of an individual or a group of people, and that inherently will change over time. So I want to talk about, we've talked a lot about communication. So before I pass it back off to Vanessa, I just want to talk about student-ready communications. And the idea is that student-ready communications are aligned to the framework. As you move through the stages that we've talked about, from data analysis and ownership to policy review and onwards to action plan implementation, your communications plan should be aligned to those as you progress through that framework. You should be able to identify your audiences and needs. We've talked about diverse stakeholdership. And Vanessa loves this guy. She's like, he's he's very popular amongst our Student Ready slides because he's just so happy and he makes everything better. So identifying those audiences and being able to understand their needs and communicate effectively out to those groups. Again, the way that you communicate with community looks different than the way you communicate with your full-time staff, looks different than you communicate with your students. And then reviewing all elements that communicate. So there are ways that we proactively and retroactively communicate with individuals. So whether it is physical communications that they see, posters, murals, physical environment, what those messages are that communicate versus the more intentional communications, like what we communicate out through email and social media, reviewing really comprehensively how we're communicating both directly and indirectly is imperative. Creating new asset-based student-friendly collateral. We know that students do not read emails. We know that as a mankind or a humankind, we do not enjoy reading large text on walls or text pages. So creating really student-driven, directed to the information that they need to get is really important. Don't try to fit existing practices into your new communications. And then again, as I said, don't rely on email. We know that students, alike me, alike other professionals, we do not read every email that we get, and it's really important that we give students the succinct information that we need them to give, and then always refer them to a one-stop point of contact that they can refer out with any additional questions. So. Excellent. Well, I am going to pass it back off to Vanessa to wrap us up, and we can go from there.
Okay, so this was so big and high level, right? So we're thinking about culture at your organizations and institutions. We're thinking about all of the structures that uphold the results that your system is getting. And then we're thinking about, okay, how do we continuously improve them once we change them? That is huge, right? And so what I want y'all to think about is reflect. Well, let me tell you what we're going to do next. We're going to talk about how you in your positions can help move some of this work forward and not feel so big and high level. But right now, I want you to think about your organization, your position that you are in right now, the people that you work with every day. What is a structure, policy, or process that, if reformed in some way, or if blown up and completely replaced, something like that, would result in increased student success? I know, when I was working in student affairs, I would meet with students every day. I would hear their stories, and I could tell inherently what policies were holding them back or were not keeping them at our institution. And that was not just where, when I said I worked at Marshall, I worked at other institutions too. And you very clearly see it. I know we had Luis here as an advisor, other advisors that are in the room, other folks working in Gear Up in K-12. What is something that, if changed, would result in increased student success? Feel free to put those in the chat box. Access to job exploration opportunities during high school. Very cool, Sherry. Yep. The approach to the first year experience. Test optional admissions, that's right. Academic probation suspension policy. Yes, you are speaking to my heart, William. Faculty and student affairs collaboration needs to change. Student-friendly policies. Yeah, policies are so important. We do a lot of work with institutions to actually dive deep into their books, right? What policies do you have on the books, and how do they create a barrier for students? Mental health awareness and training. Pipelines with, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, better pipelines with the secondary system for college readiness. I know that was a theme for the conference. That's great. Mental health, yeah, adding more counselors, adding more emphasis on mental health. I hear that all the time from institutions with whom we work. These are great. Great, great, great. All right, loved hearing those. Okay. Oh, for first gen students, supports for first gen students. Yes, I love that. Okay, so we're not going to go into that second question, but it is something that we're going to go through as I go through the next slide. So what can you do in your position to advocate for changes like what you're talking about? These big changes, even small changes, simple policy and process changes that need to happen. So the same goes, I know there might be some leadership on this call, right? So maybe you are sitting in the C-suite and you have, the keys, you're able to make changes whenever you're ready, or you work with the board to make changes at your organization. These are just some tips and tricks that everyone can use to help create clear asks. And so first, you have to establish a clear ask. Right? So everything that you just wrote down, maybe that is what you're going to focus on, right? You need to have a concrete request, like the one, like some of these, how can we create something for first-gen students? And maybe it's a specific policy or process that needs to change. So write it down, add some bullets. If that ask has more than 3 bullets, maybe take it down to 3, right? Save the rest for later when you have time or when you've got those first 3 under your belt. Leaders, and I'm sure a lot of you in here get request fatigue, like we all get initiative fatigue. And so really prioritizing what will help your students that you're working with every day is going to be the key to your success. Really think that through and establish a very clear individual ask. Next, and Theo, can you click? Are you frozen?
There we go.
All right. I don't know why that's off to the side, but hey, it's different. So maybe one of the most important pieces here is ensuring that you can appeal to different audiences. I know Theo talked a little bit about this when he talked about comms, but you can make all kinds of different arguments to build coalition around the change that you seek, all of the things that we saw in the comments or what might be in your head. So you can make a social justice argument, right? Higher education has exacerbated racial and economic inequities in the country in West Virginia. So better serving West Virginia students that are poverty affected, that are adult students, any of those things will help you remedy those social justice issues. You can focus on enrollment management, right? Make the argument that bringing more students into the institution because of these new reform structures and practices will help with recruitment and enrollment goals, right? If somebody like some folks were talking about test blind admissions, or Theo gave you the example of doing multiple measures to place students into courses, those things are things that you can actually market and get students and their families excited about. So those are opportunities for you to talk to enrollment management and your marketing team to think about to make a case for that. How do you talk to your business office colleagues, right? Make a financial argument. We talked about student retention and how that's key to keeping students and keeping money in your coffers. For government affairs professionals, there is a lot of scrutiny on students who are graduating, degrees conferred rates. So graduating more students means more prestige, possibly more money from performance funding models. There's a lot there you can do with the folks at your government affairs office. And then for community advocates, right? You have alumni, right? All over your towns. I mean, I worked in Huntington. I know how many people there are Marshall University proud and loud, and the same thing in Morgantown. Alumni there who are business owners, economic development, workforce. I know we talked about getting people career ready, right? There is a clear case to make to them that increased student success is going to serve their goals as well. So really sitting down and thinking about this idea that you had and then differentiating what that message might be to all of those audiences will be really, really helpful to think through all those possibilities and have a plan moving forward. Theo? And then this is one of my favorite slides, and it's something that, you have your ask, you have your different arguments for all of your audiences, but who can champion these things for you, right? The next step is to find these champions. This is an activity we do with a lot of folks. So we want to think about the power grid here. You're going to start in that box right there. Who supports the idea that you had and is the most influential at your organization or institution? Who has the most influence and can make decisions, right? We literally have folks write names in these boxes, right? So you can write the principal, right? Whatever that person, her name is, right? Other folks, the board, people that might be on the board at your institution. You put them in that start box. They support your idea and they're the most influential. And then you have your team of champions that will galvanize you. Maybe they're not incredibly influential, but just having strength in numbers around your idea is always great. So you put them in the galvanize box, right? Write them down and you start there. You think through, then you plan to approach all of these people on this right side first. And then you get them to help you influence those who may be naturally opposed to the idea for some reasons and help start to build buy-in around your change efforts. All right.
I'm trying.
Clicking. It's fine. But this is something that you can always look at this presentation later and kind of fill it out. So finally, well, not finally, I'm lying. There is one more after this. So through your advocacy and transformation work, you have absolutely one tool at your disposal that nobody can argue with or ignore. And we talked about this earlier. It is the voice of your students, of which you're working with. And now, even if you're at a foundation, right, you are doing this to benefit students. There is a way to engage them. How can you elevate their voice? Of course, you can survey them. One thing that we will say is that you need to have surveys that are student responsive, that are student friendly, that make sense to them. We work with a lot of clients who need us to revisit their surveys to make sure that students want to respond to them and that they're engaged in them. Use existing research that's out there, right? You can look at data that already exists around certain populations, highlight that data for folks, and share that. But we really we love to actually bring their literal voice to life by creating videos of students, making the experience real for the leaders or the decision makers at your organization or institution. And think about all of your students. As Theo said, it's easy to survey those that come to your SGA office every day, or those in fraternity and sorority life or in athletics. But there are even more students who are not as involved and have really great insight into things that could change at your institution that would make them want to stay, that would help them develop a sense of belongingness. So get them involved as much as possible, no matter if you're in the community, you're K-12, or you're in higher ed. And finally, recognize that you are never alone in this. And I love that JR put his video on for this, because this is important. You can always call on the champions inside your institution that you've already cultivated. But sometimes it's important to have other folks in your corner, right? So folks like the team at HEPC, at CTCS, having them in your corner to say, we believe in this as well. We will support you in any way that we can. Just shooting them an email and getting them in your corner will speak volumes at your institution or organization. We are here for you. It is our mission to do this work. And so we would love to reinforce your message or get you data or get you information that can help with some of the things that you put in the chat box or things that you're thinking about. So that is something that we really hope that you would do, is call for outside help, right, if you need it. So these are just a few tactics that you can use to bring to life your structural reforms, changing your culture at your institution, and implementing some continuous improvement mechanisms. And I want to have a quick note here. The pandemic has really disrupted the status quo for us, right? Everyone at your institutions and your organizations is doing something different. We all worked from home for like 18 months. You might still be working from home, right? Something that we thought we never could do, but everything is still happening. Challenging the idea of we've always done it this way, this is the perfect time to do it. It is the perfect time to go and advocate for change that will benefit student success. So we want to just leave you with that. We want you to leverage this disruption, as horrible as it was, leverage the disruption to your advantage. So I really hope this presentation gave you food for thought. Take away, every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does. Think about different discrete systems, the systems within which we work, the results that they're generating, and the importance of disrupting the status quo to ensure that we're getting equitable student success at your institutions, and your organizations are supporting that in whatever way that they can. So we are here for we have about 6 minutes to answer questions, engage in some discussion, hear your thoughts about creating a more student-ready world and how we do that. So Theo and I just want to say thank you so much.
As Vanessa said, please add your questions or suggestions, comments, thoughts to the chat box, the Q&A. You can do so anonymously. as we start to kind of wrap the session up, I definitely want to take a moment to thank you both. What a wonderful session. And I'll start with a quick question. Is there a specific location that folks you would point them to find additional resources, information, maybe start with an evaluation if they can do kind of a self-assessment? Where do you point them as like a first step to kind of approach this type of work?
Sure. Well, I'm putting our website in the chat box right now. So if you all want to check that out, that can give you some ideas. We have really good blog posts up there about getting started with communications. We have blog posts up there about thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion as a part of a strategic plan. There's a lot of good information on our website that you can find, but we are consultants that like to customize what we do. And so we would love to talk to people directly to give them a starting point. But if I had to just generally say one thing, it's to look at your data. Whatever you're doing, look at the data first, disaggregate it as finely as you possibly can as your first step to understand what's happening. That, and talk to your students. I think we hammered that in the presentation, but talk to your students to find out what's happening. If you can't find them, you can't get them, especially if you're working at a foundation or something similar, talk to your institutions, make connections at conferences like this and get to networking. And that can help you identify that student voice.
I'm putting in the chat right now one of our favorite blog posts that's really about how we begin the information gathering. And there's some nice contextualized information in there that I think you all can kind of go through and relate to your audiences. So feel free to take a look at that. But as Vanessa said, we really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all. So start there, but don't end there.
Yeah, that's right. And I really mean it. I mean, I know when I worked at the commission, we loved when we would talk with folks from the institutions, and I know that they're more than willing to help out and have your back. So if there's something that you really want to change at your institution, reach out to them. They can also get you a lot of data. I'm always blown away by the quality of the data that comes out of the commission. So there's always a lot of good stuff there for you to use.
Yep, and you can always reach out to any of us. It's through CFWV, Gear Up, directly through the commission's website. You can request if you would like us to come in and, network and workshop with some of your folks at your schools or different foundations or wherever. We're more than happy to do so. So whether it's virtually or in person, we're excited to be able to go back out in person soon. So it's been a long year.
Oh yeah, hi Amy, it's good to see you too. We're gonna start up OER community of practice again very soon. Oh yeah.
All right, so I'm not seeing any additional questions come in at this time. Thank you again, both Vanessa and Theo, for all the wonderful information and the guidance on the topic. If anyone does have questions or wants to follow up with them, I'm sure their information was in the slideshow, so feel free to reach out to them directly via email, or you can directly at them and direct message them through the platform. So those are some great ways to get a hold of them. We have a short break, so if you'd like to visit the gallery area coming up, it'll open up in just another moment, and then we'll continue sessions this afternoon. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you.
Thank you both again. Wonderful session today. I really enjoyed it. So, Vanessa, it's good to see you. Hope everything's going well.
Yeah, it's awesome. Congrats on your baby.
Yeah. She has kept me on my toes for the past year. That's for sure. So she starts school in August. So I'm excited to, yeah.
I understand.
It's crazy to think we're already at that point. I don't know where the last 2 years has gone. So
I know. That's exciting. Well, we'll be around if you need anything. Reach out. Good to see you.
We'd love to talk to you about test blind or test optional admissions, and we're huge proponents of that. So however we can make that work.
It's definitely kind of coming to the forefront more and more often right now. So it's something that I've been brushing up on myself, and I'm staying fairly actively engaged with both College Board and the ACT just to kind of gauge their thoughts going into all of this. So, but it's been an interesting and unique change.
Yeah, the pandemic has certainly been a nice catalyst for that type of change, with just the inaccessibility of SAT and ACT as in-person exams to like a reliance on high school GPA. So absolutely happy to talk more about that.
Even with the commission and the legislature here in West Virginia and looking at some of the financial aid programs and like you said, the availability and accessibility to those exams. So it's been, it's kind of, it's tentacles are reaching out far and wide as far as kind of some of the test blind stuff. So
that's
nice.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, enjoy the rest of the day. Have a great.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Theo.
Nice to meet you as well. See ya.
Bye-bye.